This is a 90-minute webinar, and we encourage folks to participate via chat with any questions that come up, especially if they're relevant to the topic at hand and might be relevant to more than one person. Feel free to put those in the chat. We'll try to be monitoring those as we go. But we also will have plenty of time at the end for participation and discussion, so you can feel free to unmute yourself during that point and ask your question, live that way. My name is Matt. I'm with the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. I work with the Co-op Clinic, which is our technical assistance and education component of the U.S. Federation. And the U.S. Federation is the national worker co-op and democratic workplace organization here in the U.S. And we do all sorts of advocacy and organizing campaigns. We support our members through the access to healthcare benefits. We have great dental and vision plans, for example, and many others. And members can connect to each other through our federation, through member networks and peer councils and peer networks, and we also come together to move policy, like I mentioned. Thank you for participating today. We are planning a whole nother series of webinars later this fall and into the winter, so look out for those. But at the end, we'll also be sharing some of the upcoming events we have. And I wanted to start by introducing our main facilitator presenter today. Brandon King is originally from Hampton Roads, Virginia, and has been deeply involved in Cooperation Jackson and all the organizing behind that work that has inspired many of us here in the co-op movement, and is involved in many other co-op endeavors and can share some great examples on our topic today around conflict. Working through conflict. Conflict is something that most of us will experience in any workplace, but in co-ops there are some very unique components that surface. So we'll be getting into those. And again, if you're just arriving, make sure you choose your language. There's a globe icon, and because we have interpretation happening. And feel free to put your comments or questions right there in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time afterwards. So just to let you know, the format, we'll have some content shared by Brandon, and then we'll be talking to two other members of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops that also can share their specific experiences, and Brandon will be interviewing them, and then we'll go into a discussion at the end. So thanks again for joining us, and I'll pass it off to Brandon.
Word. Thank you, Matt. Peace, everybody. Again, as Matt said, my name is Brandon. Spell my name all lowercase. That's because I'm not a fan of capitalism or hierarchy. And so yeah, this conversation is about, I guess, working through conflict. I think one thing that makes working in co-op space is different than like a typical kind of boss worker situation is that in a co-op space, it's not just one decider. A lot of times conflict, even if you're on the wrong, or even if you're on the right, the boss sort of makes the final decision. But in a co-op where it's one worker, one share, and you're making decisions democratically, that it creates an environment where like you actually have to work through it collectively. And I feel like that requires a different sort of level of intentionality and sharing, to be honest. And so like just going through this first slide, you know, general conflict, you know, definition is, you know, seeing conflict at potential to uncover possibilities to create deeper connectivity and more inclusive communication.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this communication, you know, something that we say in our movement, like in crisis comes opportunity, you know, and so like I feel the same way about conflict, you know, because in working through conflict, you if you're able to push through the fire, it's a lot better on the other side. It could be a lot better on the other side. But the challenge is you know, bringing your full self to the table, being vulnerable, and also sort of being amenable to like the needs of the collective, and also your needs. Next slide. You know, and so one of the things that I feel like can help with conflict and co-ops and working spaces is being real clear about your objectives, your like how you run your co-op, and what sort of roles and responsibilities people have, and people being clear about what they need to do and what they're responsible for. A lot of times conflict arises when there's unclear communication about what's required, what people think is required, like, because you might not all have the same shared definition about like how you're approaching the work. And so some of the things that we've included in our co-op is just having a basic sort of rubric for how we run our co-op to be able to mitigate conflict before it arises. And that is just sort of like having your systems and operations tight, you know. And so like that looks like, you know, having task management, like that's an important consideration. And so, you know, clearly defining what the task is, who's responsible for it, when it's due, and if it wasn't completed, like why, who was the responsible person, you know, was it too much workload, was it too less? Like all of these different things are considerations. And one thing that we did in our co-op, every week we started with like a work plan meeting, where we had an agenda set and check-ins just about to make sure like we approach the week in a way where like everybody's clear about what our goals and objectives are. Because if we didn't have that, then you know, sometimes, you know, you may not see a fellow cooperator at your job because you're doing like one specific task and they're doing another, you know. But if there's not some synergy and coordination and communication, then, you know, that I feel can lead to conflict. And so, you know, having work plans together, making sure that you also too like have like performance evaluations. You know, like I feel like a lot of times people like, you know, maybe working and like not have a clear sense of if they're doing well or if they're like messing up, you know. And so it's just for, I feel like the synergy or like the morale of your team and of each other, it's important to have like affirmations, you know, and also too, like where are areas that you can improve. And I would say don't wait until like it's like too late, you know. I feel like having something like quarterly, having something you know, biannually, you know, but making sure you set dates and times to be able to like give people feedback on how they're doing, I think is really, really important, and it goes a long way. And then too, another thing, and like it's like don't wait until like it is something where you need to like set up systems because something a situation isn't working out, and so you're setting up systems on the fly. It would be good, like if you're just beginning your cooperative to start off with like, you know, so what happens when we need to sort of reprimand or discipline or like call in somebody. And, what happens around termination. And so like having a clear grievance procedure is something that I would encourage. Next slide. And so like when conflict arises, one thing is like to try to figure out the nature of the conflict. Sometimes you might want to have like outside facilitator because everybody might be too, the conflict might be hit too close to home for everyone. And so having someone that's objective to be able to lead and walk you through the conflict can be helpful. And we have some resources that we can share with folks a bit later of some different organizations and tools that people use for this. Another thing too, I think is important to also address like power dynamics in conflict, and for me, that looks like being mindful of your social location. If you're like a cis male and, conflict is arising from you and like the genders of the people are different than yours, that might have something to do with like patriarchy, it might have something to do with like all of these different isms, right? And so I think it's important to center like anti-oppression. And like, for me, that doesn't look like when conflict arises, like just calling it in or calling it out. I also believe that it's important for co-ops to actually do work around anti-oppression and have sessions where you talk about white supremacy, where you talk about male supremacy, where you talk about heteropatriarchy. And so it's not coming out of the blue and it's not coming out of the left field when you're with your co-op, with the other co-op members. And something that we did in Jackson, we had a challenging male supremacy group that was done with all AMAB, assigned male at birth, or like male identifying people. And that was something we did so that we wouldn't, as what happens a lot of times, men processing their patriarchy with people who aren't men, and then feelings and emotions and being vulnerable. Like it's easier for men to do that amongst like women a lot of times. But this was like an active, intentional step where it's like they hold the burden of us not being like in alignment. And so we need to take that work on ourselves, and so we made space for that within our co-op. Another thing that we did was having a space for white people challenging white supremacy, and so it was with our white members, working with each other to challenge those things. And I think, especially with our project, which is a Black-led political project, having a clear sense of like being a white person and your positionality within the Black political space, we felt like that work was essential, for folks wanting to support or members, who were white or who are white, who are engaged, in our co-op, and so those were some of the things that we did. Let me see what else. Oh yeah, so like what I was saying is that like it's important to have a process together, like for how your co-op works through conflict. And my thing is, it's like it doesn't have to be stagnant. Recognize that like we're all like sort of moving through space and time, and that it can be adaptive and sort of fit the conditions that make sense for the current conflict. But it has to be something that like you collectively, y'all agree, everyone agrees to go through with the process. Because if people don't, then that can lead to more conflict, and it could lead to your co-op not being as succinct and productive. And so you know, just trying to have everybody on the same page about like what happens when things come up, that disagreements come up. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, and so one of the things that I think is really important, and it's something that I feel like, because we're like cooperators, it's like we don't want to think about like co-op members leaving or like having to terminate somebody. And so it's like we may avoid it because like I think in general, like humans, like we're conflict avoidant. And so it's like this intentional work is actually kind of helps to create a space where like your like people in your co-op feel more confident about you know, their positionality, being a worker owner, and sort of what processes happen when there's a disagreement. And one of the things that I've learned over the past years and like coming out of the labor movement is that unions many times have very, very good, very, very robust grievance procedures. And like sometimes it might be dope to sort of copy and paste a grievance procedure from a union, and then sort of like edit it down to like fit whatever your co-op is, you know, whatever kind of compliance things for your co-op. And so some of the things that you definitely need, it's like having a termination policy, you know, having that in your bylaws, an operating agreement, and when you're going through the process of kind of like terminating somebody, making sure that you document it thoroughly, because you don't want there to be misinformation or like for things to be unclear about like why this person was let go. And so be very clear and succinct about taking notes as to like how that whole process went down, in case people want to sort of refer back to it, and that helps to protect your co-op if you have that documentation. Yeah, next slide. Okay, so yeah, so we're gonna roll into this conversation. I'm gonna ask Flequer, how you say your name? I'm sorry.
Close enough. Flequer.
Flequer. Okay.
Is that all right?
Cool. Flequer. He's the CEO with Sustainergy Cooperative. It's a worker-owned business. It helps homeowners reduce their energy expenses, you know, and improves their indoor comfort through energy upgrades. And yeah, and so I have a couple questions for you. So like, my question is like, what was the point that led you all to like working with the union to set up your grievance procedure? And did y'all have one before? And what was the difference that that procedure made in your cooperative than before?
Yeah, no, Brandon, thank you. And I appreciate being here, and I'm very happy to see so many folks interested in co-ops. Definitely excited, and hopefully I can put my 2 cents and can help you something. By any means, I'm an expert in this. I'm going to share my experience as a director of Sustainergy Cooperative. And by our experience, when we launched, by the way, can you hear me clearly?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When we launched
Flequer, I'm sorry, if you want to speak in Spanish too, it's
right,
totally cool.
That's true. I forgot.
Yeah, no worries.
Disculpen. So soy Flequer Vera, director de Sustainergy Cooperative, la cooperativa Sustainergy.
I work with the Sustainergy Cooperative. I'm very grateful to be here with you, to so many people who are participating, and hope that I can help with something. When we started Sustainergy, we started with an incubator that was called Co-op Cincy, and that was an alliance of different steelworker members and from Mondragon in Spain to try to create unionized cooperatives. And the reason, since the very beginning, theoretically, the part of the union was part of the business model. And the reason we did this was because in the 80s, there was a big strike in Mondragon in which a lot of the worker owners were against other worker owners, and there was an inequality and a strong conflict. And what happened was it was going poorly in the cooperative, and the structure was being really strained. And so in the 80s, a committee was formed that was a social committee, which works as a labor union, and labor unions are not allowed in Spain, but so they didn't call it a labor union, but we created this social committee, and we said there's no difference between the floor staff and the office people. And what was important for us was, obviously, we all have values. And from the moment we started the cooperative, we wanted to be creating a model that would create opportunities for all people to grow. And there was machismo and things like that and racism that were happening. So it was very important for us to have a legal workforce that would reinforce and that contracts would be respected. And in order to be respected, there's a process where there's an unhappy worker can speak with their supervisor, and if that doesn't work, they can talk with a steward who's a worker within the worker union. And if that doesn't lead to an arrangement, it takes up to a representative of the union, and then they make sure that everything is in place, and then it goes to a lawyer if things are still not resolved. And we can see if there's a conflict that's happening, if it's based on the contract, or what is the cause, because maybe it had to do with an increase or a better position. And we needed to see the duration of the time the worker had been there. So it was very important that solidarity was created and that was shared within the cooperative, so that there would be reinforcing structures.
Gracias. Thank you, Flequer. Is there anything else you wanted to share? Just briefly?
I can tell you more about our so the union el contrato que tenemos
the contract we have of the union is very important. The vacations, the process for terminating somebody, the salary increases. It's written, it's documented. It's a lot easier when when you have a very clear process. So why do you need to reinvent something? And always good to have that third party, the third person who can see something from a different perspective, is able to look at all that. And so something else that helped us a lot, I can share some things that our cooperative did in terms of minimize conflict, or do you want us to for me to focus only on the union side? One thing that helped us a lot.
Please, yeah.
¿Cuántos minutos tengo? 5, 10.
Is it 5 minutes? How long we got, Matt?
Yeah, 7 more minutes.
So I have like
Okay.
7 more. Okay. So tenemos una reunión semanal.
So we have a weekly meeting that we do where we talk about financial education, but we also talk about problems that have appeared. And so we have a space if there's something that we need to address, something that's not working very well among the team. And so it's very important to raise these issues. It's sometimes easy to avoid those conflicts, but if we're doing that, in our experience, these conflicts get bigger and bigger, and it's like an invisible enemy that in the end destroys your cooperative. And so it's important to deal with those issues and face them. And so we do that every week. And if there's something that's happening, they can raise that every week. So it's a space that we have created that has worked well for that. And there's a space for people to be able to recommend things among communication, among coworker, and to make things more efficient in the cooperative. And then we also share, we have open books, so we share, sales, losses, and sometimes we also share the expectations in terms of salary. If we think somebody thinks they should earn more, we can look at what the profit margin and what we're able to pay, and that's helped us a lot. Sometimes people have different expectations in terms of the salary or vacations or whatever. So that's helped us a lot. The process of terminating, I explained that a little bit already. So what else? Let me see. Said, like Brandon said, it's important to document everything. If there's an issue with an employee, we're a very small team of 8 people, but if things don't improve, then we give a warning, a verbal warning, and we write it down. And then things, if the problem is still happening, then we give a written notification, and then we have suspension. And at the very end, if the person wants to leave, they can leave. Yeah, if they don't want to improve, but we're always documenting step by step. And the good thing about the grievance process is that everybody has to go through the same process. You can't skip the steps. It can't be because when somebody's Latino or somebody's a woman, the process is the same, very consistent, very clear. It's not perfect, but it gives us a good structure, a good base. So that helps us a lot. We have an annual evaluation, which should be every 6 months, but we don't have the capacity to do it more often. And that helps us a lot because that's a one-on-one. We're able to explain the problems, the issues that are coming up, and that helps us a lot to have a mentor of human resources that could help us. So human resources is one of the weakest parts that we have, and I have a mentor that gives me some advice on how to deal with an issue. And the last part is our incubator co-op CCs, which is co-op Sync, which has a weekly meetings and is doing the trainings in terms of financial advice, in terms of being a worker owner, but it teaches us a lot in terms of how to manage hate or anger and have clarity or the leadership style if you're a shark or a turtle. So understanding what kind of leadership style you have and to be able to project yourself and how you relate to other workers. So what else? So things like that, those are the things that have helped us. And so the last thing is if we don't have a mentor in human resources, there's many companies. Oh, sorry that I was speaking a little too fast. There are many companies, the consultant companies that you pay them some, and then you can find a mentor and with a contract. You call them, you say you have this issue, and it's worth it to pay them because you're able to follow up on the issues that are coming up for you. So I'm going to stop there. If you have any questions, if not, we can follow up later. I think that's been a little bit of info there.
Gracias, Flequer. Appreciate it. Matt, the next slide. So up next, we'll be talking with Libertie Valance. They're with Firestorm Books and Coffee. Libertie is a queer feminist collective. As a queer feminist collective, Firestorm features books and events that reflect their interests and the needs of marginalized communities in the South. Big up to the South. They strive to promote exploration and encounter by maintaining a welcoming, sober, and anti-oppressive space. And so wanted to pass over to you, but I had a specific question because I heard that you've been involved in collective work for a long time. And so I was wondering, like, just as a part of a collective, what are some of the points of tension that lead to disunity and conflict? And like, how did you manage these conflicts? And I, hearing from Flequer is just around like operational measures. Did y'all have any of that in place that helped to sort of support a healthy work culture and like relationships with the people in your collective?
Yeah, thanks for having me. That's okay, there's a lot to unpack there. Yeah, so in terms of working in collectives, you're right that Firestorm has always been a collective. We're a 13-year-old co-op that has always operated using consensus with like a pretty horizontal model. And I think culturally, like we're coming out of like the feminist and like anarchist bookstore movements, which have always been collective oriented, but haven't necessarily always been organized as like business cooperatives. But that's a model or a set of models that I think kind of have an inherent anti-authoritarian streak to them, and perhaps even maybe like a resistance to policy, which definitely like plays through in our approach to things, I think. So yeah, in terms of the types of tensions that come up in collectives, and we are a pretty small workplace. I think our kind of like ideal number is 5, but we're short a person right now. In the past, we've been significantly larger. When we started in 2008, I think there were 12 or 13 of us. But over time, we've shifted our model towards a smaller group of full-time people. And of course, relationships are often easier to navigate when you're a smaller group. But I think the things that come up for collectives often are, a lack of shared vision. And I'm not speaking specifically to Firestorm, but I think just in general, like, not being on the same page about what you are collectively attempting to achieve. And then interpersonal conflict, particularly in a space where things are so very horizontal. You don't have those traditional structures in place a lot of times that might mediate conflict or hide conflict, because I think a lot of times that's what workplaces actually do is they don't really address the conflict at all. And so for a collective, you really have to address those things in order to survive. And I think a lot of collectives, not speaking about co-ops in particular, but collectives like tend to fall apart when those things aren't looked after. So at Firestorm, when we started 13 years ago, we had pretty bare bones like policy in place. Like we had, I guess we had a grievance procedure. I don't remember what it looked like. I think it's been retooled significantly since then. And we certainly had some type of like firing process because we were aware that it was possible that there might be a conflict that rose to that level. But there weren't a lot of other like procedures or best practices in place. And so we've really developed those kind of like over time, kind of exactly the way that you said in the beginning in the introduction that you don't want to do, which is to basically like figure out what your approach to something is while you're going through it. And so, yeah, definitely a lot of like learning things the hard way. But at this point, I guess we haven't necessarily added a lot of policy, but we've attempted to do a number of things to shape the culture of our collective. And I think that reflects what I was saying earlier about a general kind of like suspicion of policy, partly because policy so often serves to mask dynamics rather than to resolve them. I think somebody said at one point, like years ago to me that like culture eats policy for lunch. And that's something that's really stuck with me, that like that you can write all the nice policy you want, but if the underlying culture of an organization doesn't reflect like what the policy is attempting to do, the policy will never succeed. So rather than write a lot of like lofty policy, we have instead taken an approach largely of attempting to write shared statements of intention. And those have taken a number of different forms. The first one that we worked on, which was quite significant, was an anti-oppression statement, which is really something we should have had from day one, and we didn't. And then we needed it. So that's a document that, and these are pretty much all documents I think that are on our website. Maybe there's a few of them that I'd be happy to share that aren't posted, but a lot of this we've posted publicly. And I think an important thing to say about these statements that we've worked on, like the anti-oppression statement, is that while the end result is a lovely statement and is useful to refer back to, I think the process of its development is actually where the real work took place. And like by grappling with some big ideas and how they mapped onto our experiences and identities, it kind of forced us collectively to work through things. And so similarly, we then kind of at some point realized that that was, you know, an anti-oppression statement really deals with a certain set of, you know, oppression-based conflicts. And there's a lot that isn't covered by that. You know, just things like work style or communication norms. And so over time, we've developed a set of kind of like agreements about how we show up with one another. And those are highly culturally specific to our like queer feminist space. And they're not like something that I would ever say like, somebody should copy these and use them in their co-op. Although it includes things that people are probably familiar with, like kind of like variations on things like step up, step back and stuff like that, but better fleshed out and more specific to our like history and norms. And those norms we revisit every time we hire, and we don't just revisit them in order to basically like make someone sign off on them. We also revisit them so that people can bring reflections on them. And it is not uncommon that on hiring someone, we will actually revise those agreements based on the kind of evolving makeup of who the group is and what actually works for us. And along some similar lines, we also do a number of things kind of to look after relationships within our collective. Starting from the very beginning, when we're hiring someone, I would say almost half of our interview process, which is like a multi-step, multiple conversations. I think almost half of that content is about communication style and how people navigate conflict. When we hire people, we ask them to tell us about past conflicts they've been in, what they learned from those conflicts, what they did well, what they wish they could have done better. We ask people to talk about the types of communication that work well for them, what doesn't work well for them. And then when we hire people, we actually ask them to fill out like a document that essentially answers a lot of those same questions and then some more about how people like to be communicated with. And also like helpful things like, what do I look like when I'm having a good day? Like, what do I look like when I'm having a bad day? Like, what are the signs that I'm experiencing distress? And then like, what is helpful to me from my coworkers if I am experiencing distress? And these things are written out in a shared document that lives where everybody can see them. And the idea is to like attempt to kind of like build up, I don't know, healthy relationships in which we recognize that rather than having a single policy that governs all interactions, we recognize that each of us have different needs that we can, through like care and attention, help to meet by really getting to know each other. Again, this works great, especially in a smaller workplace. We also do monthly coworker check-ins. So like I said, right now there's only 4 of us. Hopefully there'll be 5 again soon. And we schedule like an hour just to sit like with at the beginning of the month, you know, we go around in a circle and we just kind of like schedule each person with each other person in the collective. So I guess so if you've got 4 people, then you've got 16 like hour-long sessions. And those sessions can be used for anything. But you know, typically they're used to both share information about projects and work, but also share personal updates and talk about anything that might be coming up in terms of communication or interpersonal dynamics. And, you know, we're a collective where, despite the fact that everyone we've ever hired has always said that the thing they hate most is passive aggression, it seems like people struggle to raise issues. And again, that's culturally specific. Like, there's probably collectives where that's not a problem, but for us, making intentional space where people are being welcomed to like bring things up is just really important, because otherwise those things get backburnered, and it is much harder to deal with a conflict when somebody's been sitting on it for weeks or months. So yeah, we also do annual reviews, and we do have a pretty robust grievance procedure. But I would say in general, that's a procedure that we reach for when kind of the normal ways of communicating have really broken down. And we really try and kind of like resolve things peer-to-peer before, say, bringing in an outside mediator or something like that. Although we've certainly done it over the years, and you know, it's always been the right decision when we did it. So I don't know if I actually answered all your questions, but that's like a little bit of an overview of our approach to conflict, I guess.
That was really helpful. It was really, really helpful. I think there's definitely like overlap between y'all's two styles. And I think it's something that we all can learn from each other. Like, I think, you know, about that co-op principle, cooperation amongst cooperators, you know, and it's like we could, yeah, we're learning and we're sharing, you know, and I feel like, you know, it's an experiment. Like we don't have the end product or whatever, but like it's life, you know, and so it's just like the things that we learn, you know, we can pick up, you know, take what's good, leave what isn't. So yeah, I mean, so for me, that's it in terms of my questions. But I wanted to open it up to other people who are on this call, see if y'all had any comments or questions, you know, for our two presenters.
Yeah, and feel free to put those in the chat or unmute yourself and ask the questions. And while those are coming in, I wanted to kick one off, if that's okay. Just diving a little bit more into the termination process. You know, I'd love for this whole workshop to focus on the prevention and you know, how do we take those conflicts that are resolvable and move through them and have a stronger team afterward in that generative process. But so often co-ops get so stuck because the process of letting someone go who's really causing harm in the co-op isn't a smooth process, and we're figuring out as we go. So I'd love to hear any more that folks have experienced in that. And I know I've seen different kinds where there's arbitration teams already set and ready to go if that's needed, or the finding the balance of wanting to have a process where you can get quickly to remove a very problematic member, but also have some real job security and a fair process for someone who is committed to the full membership process. So if anyone has any more insights on that, that would be great.
Yeah, if I can say something that has worked for me. So one thing that works for me and I highly recommend is I use an app. I just to take notes. Each person has a file, and then when something, for example, if we have an issue with a client not being called within, we have to call clients within seconds when we get the notification. That's our policy, to make sure that we get high chance of closing, of course. And then contact the client 6 times via text, whatever, and then we kill the lead if they don't respond. We have a clear written process. If people don't follow the process, I document the client wasn't, for example, approached or called in this process, a client complaint. I document the person, I document the time, document the name of the client, and then I just keep a log. If it's because a client or a worker didn't show up for a work or something like that, I also keep a log. So when we have the evaluation that I recommend to make it at least every 2 times a year, that I only do once a year, you can bring a lot of these in packets. Like typically the same issue for the same person, like a person that comes late, a person that is not communicating well with a client. It's typically are 3 or 4 issues that are the same. So you keep a log and you can just show the person that this day this happened, this, and then if you show evidence that they actually, sometimes they don't realize they're doing that. You show evidence that this is not according to our policy, they correct themselves. But if not, you can also keep following the log, and then that's when we escalate to written suspension, termination. And when you keep showing that to the person actually understand, okay, I'm not doing my work for whatever reason. I'm not doing my work. I'm kind of terminating myself. And often, no, we only fire one person since we've been around. Typically, they recognize or they understand that maybe for some reason can be a skills gap or something like that, that maybe sometimes we cannot help them. They know that they cannot fulfill that position. But having a log helps tremendously for transparency. And it doesn't take a lot of work.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I said it all in English.
Todo bien.
Not necessary to repeat it. Fue traducido.
It was already interpreted. Thank you, Flequer.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot to say about this. I would say just that, you know, on the occasions where we've terminated relationships, we've done it badly more than we've done it well. It's hard. I think it gets worse when you don't follow the process. And paradoxically, sometimes it gets a lot worse when you don't follow the process because you're attempting to make allowances for folks or to support folks. I think some of the worst kind of separations that have taken place in our history were situations where everybody in our collective really kind of like bent over backwards in order to try and make things work for a person. And maybe like didn't want to admit on some level that it was just doomed. And I think that when you get so far off track, you set expectations that, you know, can't really be achieved. And then it hurts a lot more for everyone involved when it falls apart. So I do think that this is, I think at the point where you're actually, you know, moving towards firing someone or asking someone to leave, I think that's a point where, yeah, you want to use your policy.
Yeah, Matt, is it cool if I share a little bit? Yeah, like, so I know for us, like we've like had like some terminations, but it's like, you know, we work in the same community and those people are still there, and some of those folks are still members, and some of those folks get hired back. You know, I think it's a thing around like maybe the time and place and conditions weren't right for that particular situation. But like, I know, like for me, I'm looking at this, you know, what we're doing is protracted. It's something that like, and we can't throw anybody away. No one's disposable, you know? And so like the relationships that we have, like, even if it, you know, isn't working in the business sense, like I feel like it's important to keep those relationships and those bonds, because folks may come back around and they may have a different attitude the next time they come back around. But always have an open heart when dealing with stuff that even like you might be super pissed off about, like, but still like, you know that time heals and like people do change, you know? And so that was something I also wanted to offer. But yeah, I'm opening it up to people that are listening. If you have a question in the chat, or even if you want to take yourself off of mute and share or ask a question, reflect. We're all cooperators. I'm sure other people have examples and stuff, and so it'd be cool to hear.
Great, yeah. Ana Martina has a comment and question, and then there's a few others in the chat we can get to.
Gracias, Matt, Brandon.
Thank you, Matt and Brandon. Thank you, Liberty. My question has to do because we have a cooperative culture, we believe in certain values, and there are certain commitments, social or political commitments. But when there are situations like harassment or discrimination, it's difficult to handle this kind of situation. And there have been members of the Federation who've asked, how can we enter in some transformative justice processes? I know that it's not easy because we can't assume that we all share the same values and security and what that means for everybody. So I wanted to ask you, to Libertie and Flequer or Brandon, how have you handled when situations of harassment or discrimination?
Well, I want to say first that I think you've made an incredibly insightful point, which is that there's a real danger for those of us that understand ourselves as operating kind of ideologically or kind of like values-driven workplaces. I think there's a danger that we believe on some level, even if we don't say it intellectually, that we believe in our hearts. There's this thing to dispel that maybe it won't happen here, or like we wouldn't let it happen, or that somehow our spaces are immune to those dynamics. And unfortunately, that's absolutely not the case. And that workplace harassment and discrimination happen in progressive and radical spaces. And so I do think that being honest about that and aware of it and really believing that it could happen in your workplace is like a prerequisite to being able to identify it when it's happening. So thanks for naming that. Yeah, I think that it's really tough when people's boundaries are being crossed and there's real harm being done, and it's not just a question of somebody didn't show up to work on time or somebody's communication style rubbed someone else the wrong way. And I think it can make it feel like the stakes are really high in those situations. But I think the first and most important thing is just that it has to be taken extremely seriously, and that there has to be a robust commitment, and not just to kind of go through the motions of addressing harm and oppressive dynamics, but to really interrogate that. And I think if somebody's not interested in doing that, then there's not, ultimately there can't be room for them within a cooperative, in my opinion. And obviously that's an insufficient answer because this is such a deep topic, but I think that that's my starting point for approaching something like this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the person committing harm has to accept the fact that they committed harm and be willing to participate in the process to right the wrong. And so for me, I think about restorative justice practices, transformative justice practices, where you're basically sort of taking direction from the person who was harmed and asking them, what can that person do to make things right? And making sure you set up a process where that person who was harmed feels supported, and also that person who committed the harm isn't just isolated, without any support. I know my role in Cooperation Jackson, I was that person that would be the point person with the person who committed harm. Because I feel like what happens a lot, I think we're inundated with cancel culture, and we dispose of people if they do something wrong, but we've all grown up in the patriarchal, capitalist, super exploitive, super exploitative society, And like, so that reflects in our culture and our social relations. And we all have it. It's in all of us. And so I think it's a recognition of that, and recognition that the harm that a person commits it doesn't define a person, you know, and there may be other like variables that contributes to people committing harm. They may have been harmed themselves, you know, and so I think it's a thing around seeing people and not letting go of people, and also to, yeah, just trying to set up a process where people feel like they may not be homies afterwards, but they will feel like my problem was addressed. This person knows, and they're on the road to being, you know, to moving in space differently, moving in space better.
Those are great points. So the way, I mean, I just echo whatever you said. I think that it really is important to speak to the person that committed aggression and also get the leadership, or get important feedback from the people that was hurt. And then what I typically like confront them. I go and I speak to MC, make sure they understand. Sometimes they don't see that they are doing these type of things. They are in certain environments. And also, we've been fortunate. We have not had a lot of these. We have a diverse group, and we're also small. We have 8 folks, so it's easy to know people's stories, and you see people more often. So we have not had. We've been fortunate to not have a lot of like a strong issues like what I've seen, like when co-ops grow and they have like 40 folks, and then you don't know people's stories, and that can be more clear. Or maybe we do have it, but just so hidden in our small co-op, we don't identify very well. But what I do is I speak to them face to face and get both sides of the story. And then if I feel something I cannot approach, I get advice from my mentor, or I also get our incubator involved, because we have a person that actually does mediation, and she's very, very good at it. So I've been fortunate to have that person that come and just mediate and facilitate between both parties. And as you said, Brandon, probably at the end they are not homies, but you know, they can still work together and you know, have a place that people at least respect each other. That's been our process.
We have any like more questions or comments? The chat is popping off. It's a lot of good responses in the chat if you want to check it out.
Elizabeth tiene una pregunta en el chat. No sé si quiere
Elizabeth has a question in the chat. I don't know. Would you like to have the microphone, Elizabeth?
Si no, yo la puedo leer. Dice, me gusta mucho lo que dijo Libertie.
Says, I like what Libertie said with her group's hiring process.
Si una empleada no quiere participar en la
If somebody doesn't want to participate in the resolution of conflict, what would you do?
It's a little hard to answer questions like this
Es difícil responder.
without a
Sorry.
specific situation. But in general, I would say that being unwilling to explore and address conflict would be kind of a deal breaker for working with someone. I mean, it's being willing to work through conflict is part of what you sign up for when you join our cooperative. I mean, maybe there are some like edge cases in which there's a particular conflict that someone is unable or unwilling to address, and there's some valid reason for that. But for the most part, I would say someone who is unwilling to address conflict in our workplace would no longer be welcome in our workplace.
Okay, I would like to make a statement. There's some co-op that you're being paid based on how you work. It's not necessarily the group, the members decide on the pay. You may have, like, I'm in the childcare cooperative range. And I guess different people might work for different set of money, but we'd have a fixed rate or starting rate in which we go there and work. And it might be different in terms of the pay. And sometimes other members might feel one way that, you know, they took a job that somebody was paying this, or they wanted it so bad, or I don't know, whatever the situation is. And then there might be issues around pay that will be recognized on the books, or because somebody went into some file, and it creates conflict, like in a way that you may hear comments that, oh, some people work for less money and some people work for more. And it wasn't like a case where nobody give you that amount. That's what you agreed to. So what's a good way to deal with something like that? And then there's some other issues that will come up. There will be a co-op with multilingual people, of different kind of people. Sometimes, you know, let's say there might be like 10 Latinas and 3 Blacks. So most of the time, the pull will be in the group that resemble each other. So if there's somebody that's very disrespectful or loud or aggressive, they might have more to support them and use language as a way not to communicate that to you, but use it as an action once there is a meeting. So you still may not be able to resolve things because the pull is in favor of the majority. So I know it's a lot. I just wanted, whichever aspect you want to choose, that someone on the panel who's good at this can, at least for the last scenario, to give an advice on how this could be resolved or make better.
I can try. I think it goes back to something I was saying earlier around like positionality and sort of recognizing your social location and recognizing the power that you have, you know, as an individual, but also as a collective. And like, you know, your perspective might be different than a minority perspective on your team. And for me, I would say to be conscious, aware of that, and also like to have your opinions or like your viewpoint sort of weighted to the point of where like you know that like it's biased because these dynamics exist, you know. And so recognizing the bias, like what can you do, like what can the like you were saying is more Latinos than Black folks, what can the Latinos do to sort of understand their power and like how that affects the other people on their team. And so it's not like you know, folks ganging up on, or like you know, these opinions are like are more valued because they're the majority sort of thing. You know, I think it's a constant sort of recognition and understanding of like your social location and power, and like having collective conversations with all of your team, like about that and how that shows up in real life situations.
Can I ask one of Libertie? Hello, everyone. I'm Emily, she, her. I'm enormously grateful for the wisdom and stories y'all are sharing, Brandon and Flequer and Libertie. I'd love to pose this one, perhaps maybe mostly for Libertie, and curious for all. Libertie, I heard you describe the delineation of some conflicts and related practices, you know, some rooted in oppression, power dynamics, others more centered on communication or work styles. And I think my question is, you know, do you have any experience of conflicts that have or maybe were interpreted to like touch on both? And if so, if you have any guidance or wisdom to share around, yeah, the both and-ness, I'd appreciate it.
I would just say that I think probably the scenario in which a conflict is only one of those two things is probably the unusual scenario on some level. I mean, maybe I'm overstating here, but certainly in any situation in which the underlying conflict is one of power, my experience is that it will always manifest in part as a disagreement over work and communication, and that individuals who are perhaps kind of inhabiting a position of greater power will rarely identify the conflict as being about power, and will virtually always identify the conflict as being about quality of work or attitude or any number of other things. So I think the result is that you almost have to expect that those two things are going to be intermixed, and it's messy, and sometimes it's really helpful to have an outside facilitator to disrupt the way in which I think one dynamic can kind of like overshadow the other. I think the main thing in my mind about this is just, you know, I'm thinking about some specific situations in which people were kind of exchanging criticisms across a divide, and some of those criticisms involved power and abusive behavior and boundary crossing, and some of them involved criticisms of work. I think it's really important to basically call time out and address things, give things their space. And in particular, I think give allegations of like harm and abuse and, you know, misuse of power its space, in a space where there isn't a deflection that like, you know, these behaviors were warranted because I was just so upset that I came into work and yet again, this coworker is not pulling their weight, or is, you know, they didn't lock the back door, or like whatever it is, because those deflections prevent you from ever having the conversation about power. And at the same time, I think it's fair to tell someone who is upset about quality of work that there will be a space to address that as well, right? Because those things, they're real, and yet I think we have to separate them and be able to have the conversation about each of them, and name how maybe like the feelings we're bringing to those conversations are influenced by the different pieces, but also not allow one set of conflicts or concerns to be railroaded by another. And again, I think when these things get really messy, an outside facilitator is like almost essential. Yeah. And a good mediator will be able to pull all that apart and hear everybody. And a lot of times it is about people feeling heard, right? It's like typically like people get escalated when they believe that they are saying something and that no one is hearing them. And so one of the good things about a facilitator, if you can't have someone within your organization, I hear Brandon talking about roles that exist within his co-op, and I think that's awesome. So if you are a large enough co-op, or you have the resources to do that in-house, that's cool. But a lot of times having someone come in from outside is really essential.
So helpful, thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. So we have one last question, or this is in the chat, and then we're gonna just move forward. It's from Rosa. She says, how would you act if people in your cooperative do not want to work to sustain your business? And also, what would you do if your bylaws or operational agreements are not followed? And so for Liberty or Flequer, y'all have any reflections?
Yeah, can I start in a second? My battery is pretty low, and I don't have my charger with me, but I can tell you that if people don't, if typical, I think what helps us a lot is to share the financials on weekly basis. People know what we're selling, people know what we're expending, and then we have a goal. If we meet certain goals, people get motivated for trying to get those incentives. Give us job security, and people see how much money we have in the bank that can help us tremendously during COVID. And that's a good example of that we always use to see for the importance of having a healthy business and have job security. That's the one I would take typically. The open book management, extremely helpful.
Mhm.
And if the bylaws are not followed, I mean, when you have a contract with a union, it's difficult not to follow this process. You have a legal responsibility. So we haven't had a lot of issues. That's why I think that having a union just bring this reinforced mechanism, this party that can supervise and make sure that people don't, that culture doesn't get diluted. Those are my 2 cents.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. Just wanted to share before we wrap up. I wanted to share some resources with you about this conflict and working in different democratic workplaces. A lot of this stuff I think has to do with preparation, and so like designing systems for evaluation and accountability. And so like here, there's a couple different toolkits. There's a couple different things around like facilitation and also different articles and resources from DAWI, from their website. And there's also resources on conflict and co-ops. Aorta project, they have a whole conflict resource packet that I think could be helpful if people checked out. I know Matt said in the chat that all of these, the presentation, but also the resources that are listed within this this deck and this slide, those resources will also be sent out to folks who participated. And so y'all can't click on it from here, but we will make sure that it's available. Yeah, I think that's it. I guess on my side, related to the resource piece.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon and Flequer and Liberty. This has been such a wealth of experience and sharing of ideas, and everyone else who's participated. This has been great. I just want to leave you with some more resource that we can offer here at the Federation. I mentioned in the very beginning, but I wanted to say it again. The Co-op Clinic has this whole peer network of folks who have come, who work in co-ops, but are also trained advisors. So we are happy to connect you with that network. And you can request support at usworker.coop/co-op clinic and fill out a little form, and then we can hear about your specific needs and find the right advisor for you. So that's an important national resource that we're hoping to, that we would like to offer for you all to take advantage of around conflict and many other systems. So and many other issues that co-ops are often needing. So we have good advisors there. And Brennan mentioned it, there's a new guide that Democracy at Work Institute just finished and is available for free at institute.coop. It's called the Democratic Management Guide, and it has some great resources to deal with issues of power, to deal with accountability and setting up some of those democratic management systems. So very much highly recommended. And just a few announcements before we wrap up. That for those of you who are U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperative members, we have a virtual member meeting coming up September 23rd at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 Central, 3:30 Pacific. Please do join in for that conversation. There's so many really great updates and things happening in the Federation. That's a great way to plug in. As well, there's Worker Co-op Week happening in November 3rd through 5th, and you can plug into that at conference.coop. The sessions are in progress right now, but you can get info and plug in there and hold the date for sure. It's sort of a combination of the Eastern Conference for Workplace Democracy and the Western Worker Co-op convergence that people may have participated in the past. It's all online this year. Hopefully we can be in person again soon. And consider joining as a monthly sustainer with the Federation of Worker Cooperatives at usworker.coop if you found this useful. And again, all these resources that we've mentioned will be shared in a follow-up email. And sometime soon, we'll also be sending out a guide that walks you through many of the processes that Brandon explained in the beginning, and some more resources. So look out for that as well. And I'm just going to make space if anyone else, any of my coworkers or anyone else here have some announcements they'd like to chime in on. Feel free to do that. Otherwise, we will wrap up and send you information soon.
Muchas gracias, Matt, Raquel, a los intérpretes también por
Thank you,
apoyar.
Matt, Raquel, the interpreters for supporting with this session. Thank you, Brandon, Flequer, Libertie. Everything you shared really supports the community, because conflict is really what continues to come up once and again in the cooperative. So thank you for everybody who accompanied us. And like Matt said, we're going to be sharing resources by email.
Thank you so much. I belong to a small organization trying to become a co-op. And we learned today that we've already got some of this information down pretty good, but we still have the conflict and resolution. And so I'm sure this information will be very helpful for us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just one more thing. You don't have to start from scratch with all these policies. As people have mentioned, there are decent templates out there, and the guides will offer some of that, a starting place, but then making sure it fits the culture of your cooperative. All right. Thank you all for participating, and thanks again, Brandon, Libertie, Flequer, and the interpreters for all your sharing today.
De nada. Paz. Peace, y'all.
Bye, muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Rosa.
Gracias, Rosa. Thanks.
De nada. You're welcome. Okay, we'll log off now unless you need